Hello everyone and welcome to the Omega Metroid podcast from OmegaMetroid.com. My name is Andy Spiteri, back from the dead, joined by Doom Crossing. How are you, my friend? I missed you guys last week. I was sad I couldn't join. You didn't want me on last week, but I'm here now and I'm pumped to be talking Metroid Prime. How's it going?
It's all good. We tried to keep you off while we could, but we weren't powerful enough. The definitive ranking of Metroid Prime looming over our heads. There was no way to keep you out, and so reluctantly we bring you back on. But in all seriousness, though, it's really happy you're back. Glad you're feeling somewhat better at least.
Thank you.
Talking that you were still having some sort of lingering cough or something like that, but
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that I don't sound too goofy today, but yeah, I was really sick last weekend, which is actually funny because my ZeldaCast co-host Allison also was very sick last weekend, so we just managed to get sick at the exact same time. So it looked like I actually canceled all my podcasts last week, so I wasn't on Omega, I wasn't on the ZeldaCast, I wasn't even on Virtual Theater, so I rescheduled all of them, and so I had a lot of catching up to do this week, but I mostly feel better. Yeah, I just got this hack that's still lingering, so I'm hoping that it doesn't, weasel its way into this show today. So if I do, I'll try and mute myself as fast as I can. But yeah, other than that, I feel pretty good. Thank you guys for covering last week. I actually, I haven't even got a chance to listen to the show yet, and I usually listen to the podcast basically as soon as it's out. So that kind of shows how sick I was. I was coming home and just going to bed almost every night. So, but that's in the past, and we've got a bunch of exciting stuff in the future, the very near future for today, and of course, that is the return of the definitive ranking, and this time we are definitively ranking one of the best games of all time. So, spoiler, I think that these rankings are probably going to be pretty high. Is that fair?
I expect quite a lot of fives coming up.
Yeah. And rightfully so. But I do want to say, I think I may have told this story before, but I just wanted to throw out a quick Metroid Prime memory, just because I missed last week and I just wanted to talk about it. But I have a very, very fond memory of Metroid Prime coming out. I was a junior in high school when this game came out, so I was in grade 10. And this game came out November 18th, and I remember that was the first time that I ever skipped school, ever, in my life. Now, I would go on to skip a lot of school in high school after this, but I'd been in high school for, 2 months or something like that at this point. I was 14 years old. So I was just like, you know what? I'd gotten my dad to pre-buy the game for me, at Electronics Boutique. So all I had to do was go over to the mall and pick it up. And I was like, I know that I shouldn't skip school, but I really want to play Metroid Prime. So what's a fella to do? So I skipped school. I skipped religion class, if you can believe it, actually. So because I went to Catholic school, so your
parents must be so proud of you.
Yeah. So I skipped religion class. I went and got Metroid Prime, and I played it up until 6 p.m. because at 6 p.m. that Doom is when the automated calling system went out to your house that would say it was a pre-recorded message that said your child has missed this day of school or whatever. Please let us know if this is an attended absence or not. So at 6 o'clock I sniped that phone, I quickly hung it back up, and I started playing Metroid Prime for the rest of the night, and it was awesome.
Had the whole scheme planned. I love it.
Yeah. And so I think it was a little bit later that I got Metroid Fusion. I think I had to wait till Christmas for that one, but eventually I got Metroid Fusion as well. And these were in the days pre-backlit screens. So this is way back when. So we'll talk about that when we talk about Metroid Fusion, which is coming up. I know that it seems like we maybe are ignoring Metroid Fusion's 20th anniversary, but we are doing a whole slew of shows, which I'm very excited for. But today, it's all about Metroid Prime, baby. It's
prime time.
It's prime time. One of the greats of all time. This game was one of the first games that I can remember where I was so excited for, because when I was a kid, my favorite games Ocarina of Time or Super Metroid, those had already been out and they were already great, you know what I mean? But I just came to them a little bit later. But with Metroid Prime, that was the first one that I could think of that was upcoming where I was just like, I gotta play this game. I'm so excited. Maybe that and Smash Bros. Melee, but definitely Metroid Prime. I was just like, wow, like this is so awesome. I'm so excited to play this game. And, as I'm sure you have, played it a bunch of times since, and still just like a masterful game.
Yeah, it's incredible how well the game holds up, especially because we were talking about this on the last episode, but we were discussing some of the Retro Studios ex-employee tweets, like stuff from Zoid and Jack Matthews, who are talking about like all these behind the scenes going ons with the games, and just it is just all of the trickery and technical stuff that went into making this game a reality is just
Yeah.
nothing short of incredible. Seeing like all the work and the artistry that was put into it.
And another thing worth mentioning too is like this would be a good time to plug actually our episode about the history of Retro Studios. But I like that studio was a mess. It was in shambles, and so for them to like pull this rabbit out of their hat and create a game that 20 years later is still not only inherently playable but still excellent in almost every aspect is truly it's like a once in a lifetime thing that they pulled off with this game.
Yeah, typically when you hear stories of this, you get like a Two Human or a Duke Nukem Forever or
Yeah.
stuff, or Aliens Colonial Marines, stuff that's just so infamously bad that's the only reason anybody remembers them for. But Prime is like the exact opposite end of that scale, where somehow like this game is still ending up on like greatest games of all time lists 20 years later.
Yeah, I have a funny story. So back in my high school or like junior high school days, I went to this website called GameCubeLand.com, and it was like a forum or whatever. And my name was Too Human because I was like, oh, that game looks cool. And I just picked it as my name because I was like 13 or whatever. So eventually, it never did come out for GameCube, but eventually when it did come out, it was absolutely dreadful, which is too bad. But I always have a soft spot for that game. But yeah, very glad that Metroid Prime did not go the way of Too Human. So we are here today to definitively rank Metroid Prime. And if you are new to this sub-series, then first of all, you should go back and check out some of the old Metroid definitive rankings that we've done. We've done Fusion, we've done Echoes. The last one we did was Samus Returns back in March. So we have
May.
May. One of those M months. So we have it's been a while since we've done definitive ranking, but I'll explain the gist of it here. There are 10 categories that we have deemed essential to the makeup of a Metroid game, and we are going to give Metroid Prime a score out of 5, with 5 being it is the absolute best and 1 being it is dreadful. And we're going to go through this list, and we are going to assign scores, explain why we're giving them the scores, and tally it up at the end and see what kind of overall score we come out with. So that said, I think we're ready to just get rocking and rolling, hey?
Well, you did forget the one special rule that we're implementing during this episode, and that anyone who gives a 1 or a 2 ranking is banned for life from the podcast moving forward.
Yeah, so. I don't foresee any 1 or 2 rankings in this show, if I'm going to be honest with you. So, like, for reference, we did and I don't know that I could ever do this with another game, but we did a definitive ranking on the Zelda cast where we did Ocarina of Time, and I gave it straight 5s. Like, every single category was a 5. I don't think that I will do that for Metroid Prime, but it's not going to be far off.
I don't think I will either, despite it literally being my favorite game of all time. So
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how that goes.
So like I think it's going to be pretty close to as straight 5s as you could possibly get. It might be the highest rated Metroid game that we ever do for this series. Who knows? So let's just start off and let's get it started. Would you like to go first, Doom?
Sure, why not?
Okay, well then let's talk about the number 1 category, the category that we're going to start off with, the world and atmosphere of the game. So the vibe, the setting, the mood. The world is such an important character to this franchise that really nailing that is a massive ingredient for a Metroid game. So let's get it started here, Doom. What is your score?
Well, shocker. We're starting it right off with an easy five right off the bat. I mean, this is, and I talked about this on the last episode as well, but, to use an overused word in the Triple A's game industry, Metroid Prime is the most immersed I've ever felt in a game world. And the only game that has really tapped into that since then for me has been Breath of the Wild, but in
Mm,
its own unique way. But Metroid Prime, every nook and cranny of that game has a story to tell, whether it be from your scan visor, whether it be the environmental storytelling, whether it be the music that's feeding off the environment itself. Everything has information to deliver the player, and when you all collect it in together, it's such a beautiful narrative
hmm
at its core. And it's just, and whether or not you're someone that cares about that narrative, or you just care about the vibes of the experience, there's something for everyone to get out of this game, regardless whether you prioritize gameplay or story. And that, to me, is what's so magical about this Prime game.
Right. Yeah, and so the beauty of the definitive ranking is like a lot of these categories like kind of tie in together into the other categories. So like typically if you have a category like world and atmosphere that's really firing on all cylinders, that also means that like your story or your art style is also firing on all cylinders. And so like it's kind of like they are tied together, so when one is doing well, it's like that old saying about a high tide raising all ships. So I'm going to agree, and I'm going to give this one an easy five as well. The, I mean, I think that there's a lot of different moments that we've talked about previously that just completely like are like out of body experiences. Like the first time that you step off the ship in the Talon overworld and you've got the rain coming around you, you've got the soft Brinstar remix playing. It's just like an ethereal experience, like this world that's created, and that's replicated like several times over in the game, like up in space when you're on the frigate Orpheon and you're just looking and you can see Ridley flying through space. It's just like, wow, this is incredible. The first time that you get into Phendrana and you can just see like the stillness and the quietness while also you have that music playing is just like such an absolutely incredible moment. And I could go on. There's a bunch of moments like that.
The Phendrana moment in particular is so perfectly executed, like
Yeah,
following Magmore Caverns. Like it's like you couldn't have picked like the perfect area to like go to move on from after that.
and it's just like it's so it's so like ethereal. I think it was a good word, and in that like this planet just feels so alive. Like it feels like something was just here and you just missed it. Like the Chozo were just there and they're just out of reach, and but you can still see the evidence of them on this planet, and you have all of these organisms on this planet that make it feel truly like an actual place that functions. You have structure with the pirates. You have this incredible world that feels alive, and you have like a history and a lore to that world. And even within like the different areas themselves, you have like kind of subsequent sub areas that also make it feel like very very lived in and very just like ethereal again. So this is like the world and atmosphere is kind of a broad category, but I think that it kind of shows you like when this category is going really well, that means that typically a lot of your other categories following behind it are also functioning at a high level, and this is, I think, the perfect example of that. So yeah, this is an easy five for me. I'll never forget the first time that I went to Talon 4.
Yeah, that moment, and again, another moment we talked about in the last episode. But yeah, that moment where Samus lands on Talon 4, surveys the landscape, that was the moment where I became a Metroid fan. Like
Mm-hmm.
right there, that was it.
Yeah, just an incredible world, the perfect world, really. Like they needed this so bad for the first 3D Metroid, especially the first 3D Metroid that was a first-person adventure. They needed to get the world right, and they did. And it seems like an impossible task almost looking back, but somehow they got it completely right. There's the famous shot in Super Metroid when you land on Criteria and the rain is coming, and like somehow they managed to replicate that in a different but same way on Talon 4. So just yeah, an incredible achievement, incredible world, incredible atmosphere, and I think that permeates throughout the whole game and really just sets the tone for everything that you're going to experience on your adventure. So yeah, 2-5
Well,
so far.
Well, I think what's cool about Criterion Super Metroid, because I mean, obviously, like it's clearly inspired by that Talon 4
Yeah.
landing sequence, but what's cool about it is that it's able to differentiate itself from Super Metroid. It's not just a carbon copy. Whereas
Hmm.
the Super Metroid introductory sequence, it's trying to highlight, kind of the stillness of the planet, and kind of the decay of everything. Whereas Talon Overworld, despite all the chaos that's going around as you explore deeper on the planet, this is like the one safe haven of the planet where like the natural fauna is still
Hmm.
thriving despite the Faison corruption and all that, and it does such a beautiful job of highlighting that.
Yeah, I think that Criteria feels very dark, very ominous, very threatening almost. And like, you're right. Like in Talon, it kind of feels like the flip side of that. Like it feels inspiring. It feels safe. It feels like just wow. I'm look at this lush planet that is it's wounded, but it's still so full of life. It's still so full of hope. I guess for lack of a better word. So yeah, they did a great job nailing the intro. Um, so yeah, let's move on. We've got 2 5 so far, and I'm gonna give another 5 right now, and that is for the art style. So this is kind of a broad uh, category. So we're kind of talking about like the graphical presentation. We're talking about like the like for a Zelda game, for example, you can have different art styles, like a Wind Waker style art. You can have like a realistic Twilight Princess style. Metroid is a little bit more consistent with its art, but I still think that there is enough variations to include this. So I think that comes to mind for me right away is like the hyper realistic presentation of Metroid Prime. And I'm not really like a big like super hyper realistic kind of guy when it comes to games in graphics. I like a little bit of stylized in my presentation, but this I mean just looks like so spectacular. The models for Samus look incredible. The models for Meta Ridley look incredible. The different characters, like the different creature designs and stuff like that, it all just looks like very breathtaking. And I think that by trying to go for a like that realistic sense, like they really do a good job of like creating a world that feels obtainable or like feels like this could exist somewhere in the universe. And I wasn't quite sure where to mention it, so I'm going to mention it in this category as well. But I also think that while not quite an art style, it's maybe an artistic choice. I loved what they did with the commercial for Metroid Prime, with they have the live actor and they have like they built that set and like it was so cool. It made it seem like a very big deal. It made it seem like a level above maybe where the Metroid series actually was, like the investment that went into that commercial and the production value that went into it. So art style, I think that the game looks spectacular. I think that the character models of Samus, of Ridley, of like a lot of the different models of enemies that you see, Metroid Prime itself looks like spectacular. The world looks spectacular. Like I just think this is another knockout, easy 5.
Yeah, we'll just echo those same sentiments right there. An easy 5, and honestly, like it's incredible that this is quote unquote the worst looking game of the trilogy, and that Prime 2, which also is on the GameCube, somehow looks even better. But even despite that, Metroid Prime 1, after 20 years, man, does this game hold up? Yeah,
It really
there's
does.
there's some occasional areas where it shows its age. There's some parts in that introductory Talon Overworld world cutscene where the camera's a bit too close to the foliage and you can see some pixelization. But like those are such minor complaints at the end of the day. And the fact that again, that this game looks as good as it did in 2002 is it's mind-boggling. At the time, there was nothing that even came close to what this game was doing at the
Yeah.
time. And we talk about art styles that age well, and typically stuff like cell shaded art styles or stuff inspired by hand drawn art styles, something that's very stylized. Those are typically the art styles that end up aging well. Usually, those realistic looking visual designs, those are usually what
Age
ends
the
up not looking
worst.
good.
Yeah.
Especially, I would say, especially in the next generation during the 360 and PS3 era, a lot of those games really didn't age well, in my opinion. But man, Metroid Prime, despite that, I wouldn't necessarily call it hyper realism. There's still a little bit of stylism and creative liberties, but it's very much, especially
Hmm.
for a Nintendo game, like it's by far one of the most leaning more towards the realism scale, I think, than a lot of their other properties. And I mean, the fact that it's still like one of the GameCube's best showcases from a graphical standpoint is just, I mean, what else can you say?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like, I think that at the time, certainly this was the most like realistic game that Nintendo ever made. You know, because like before then, we're talking like, yeah, there's some realistic looking parts of Zelda there, but like that's still a high fantasy setting that is very stylized. Or you know, there are some, I guess, realistic looking parts of like, you know, Donkey Kong Country, like the trees look realistic, but like, you know, it's still, it's about apes and it's about Kremlins. So this game, I feel like really was kind of a different approach for Nintendo, which I guess makes sense because we had a different studio, so naturally you're gonna have a different approach. But it really does look very incredible, and it still holds up, which is actually flabbergasting because there's lots of games that came out after this that look terrible if you look at them today. And like even like games that are like early PS4 games or like late Wii, late 360 games don't have that same level of polish that Metroid Prime does, which is frankly like almost unfathomable to think out when we're talking about like a 20-year-old Nintendo game that really didn't rely on like a very creative style of art in order to, you know, like trick, for lack of quote unquote, people into thinking that it looked better than maybe it did. So it's actually a marvel that this game is it looks as good as it does and runs as well as it does. Like you're right, there are some very minor things if you want to go like nitpicking, but even in 2022, like I played this not that long ago, it looks awesome. It really does.
Yeah.
It looks awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually went back and played the original Gears of War recently. My God, because like that game for me, like when that original Gears of War title came out, that was like the first game where it was like, oh, this is next gen gaming. This is not something you could do on the previous consoles. But I went back and played that. My God, that game is so ugly nowadays.
Hmm.
The remaster is the way to go if you're playing that game. The remaster is gorgeous, but like that original Gears of War, man, those textures are really rough on that game. Performance is pretty inconsistent in a few areas too, but like my God, Metroid Prime somehow all these years. And Andy, I know you don't care about frame rate, but I gotta shout out the fact that they somehow managed to get a consistent target of 60 FPS on that game, which has no right to run as smoothly as it does.
It's funny to think about actually. Like back in the GameCube's day, it wasn't the most powerful. That was the Xbox, but like it was not that far off, and certainly far more powerful than the PlayStation 2. So it is funny to think about that. Like just how not even that long. I mean, I guess 20 years is kind of a long time ago, but you know, back a couple console generations ago, Nintendo was putting out pretty high quality, high powered hardware.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get back to that one day. Although I mean I do think maybe some people will scoff at this, but like I do think that you don't necessarily always need that. Like as long as your game does have a artistic like presentation to it, it'll be timeless. But again, that just kind of shows that once again, Metroid Prime is kind of bucking the rules that are typically, you know, Nintendo's rules, that you know, the things that Nintendo lives by. So yeah. All right. Well, you mentioned Gears of War, and I remember playing the first Gears of War and hating it actually because I thought that it was fun enough to play, but the story was so lackluster and like all over the place that I was like, why am I doing what I'm doing? And this is my way of segmenting or segueing into our next category, which is the story of Metroid Prime, that I actually kind of went back and forth on with the score. So I might let you go first and then I'll follow up afterwards. But take it away. What do you think of the story of Metroid Prime?
I am going to give this another 5 just because like if you look at the actual plot of Metroid Prime, there's not a lot going on. Like if you, but I feel like you could do that with a lot of game stories. If you look at just the bare bones plot, I think why I would give it a 5 though is the way that Metroid Prime delivers its narrative and all of the details surrounding it. Because like at the end of the day, the plot is Phazon go Phazon crashes on Talon 4. Pirates want to mine Phazon. We have to stop pirates, and also there's another evil breeding within the Phazon. We need to destroy it so that we can save Talon 4. It's it's a whatever plot. but all of the lore that goes into it in the Chozo's struggles, how it, again, it ties back into the environment, and how the game slowly drips feeds you as much or as little of the story if you want, depending on whether or not you're interested in it. I think that's what makes it so special. And while I think Echoes on a narrative level, I think is a better story overall. I significantly prefer how Metroid Prime tells its story, because Echoes, it pretty much lays out all its cards right after the tutorial sequence. You know everything that's going on. Whereas Prime, even if you're doing thorough research, you're not going to fully connect the dots until about 3/4 of the way through the game, and it's such a really interesting way that it keeps you invested into all this.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah.
Okay, so I was going back and forth in my head, and I was thinking originally of giving this a 4, but I think I'm going to give it a 5 too. And I think I'm going to do that not because, in the traditional sense that we understand video game stories, like Metroid Prime is fairly, you have an opening and you have an end, and you have a little bit of story at the opening and at the end, and that's pretty much it. But I think I'm giving this a 5 because I think that this is the way that Metroid as a series should be telling its stories, and I think it's the way that fans appreciate stories of Metroid the most, because we saw what just happened with Metroid Dread. A lot of people were just like, oh, there's too much exposition in the beginning, middle, and end, and like nothing in between. So that kind of style I don't think works. There's a lot of people with Metroid Fusion that are just like, I just want to skip all the story stuff and get to the action. So like that doesn't work either. We saw with Metroid Prime Corruption where like, oh, the game is too quote unquote linear, like I just want to explore. So like that doesn't work either. So it's kind of like finding what does work for Metroid in terms of like delivering the perfect story. And I think Metroid Prime is that, because like you said, you can go and you can understand the base narrative of the plot. You're following Ridley to this planet. You land on the planet, and you know that A, you have to defeat the space pirates, and B, that there is something called Faison that is overtaking the planet, and we're going to try and save it if we can. And that's really the story for the game. But like, if you want to, you can dig in and you can get the Chozo lore and discover like, what is Faison? Where did it come from? What happened when it hit? Like, what happened to the planet after it started spreading? You can dig into the pirate lore and say like, what happened to these guys after the events of Nestroid? Like, what happened to Ridley? Why is he back alive? What does the structure of the space pirates look like? I think that's a really impressive thing that this game did, is it made the space pirates seem like a legitimate organization rather than just like a collection of bad guys that you needed to defeat. Right? Like imagine like Donkey Kong Prime, like you're looking at like the Kremling logs or whatever, and like there's some structure there. So because before that, the space pirates were basically just like generic bad guys. So I love that they did that. And I think that what Metroid Prime also does, which maybe it doesn't get enough credit for with the story, is like this sets up like 2 extra games with arguably the series' most cinematic payoff in Metroid Prime 3. So there's a lot going on with the story. There's threads that they leave uncovered. It also had like the first post-cinematic, like the hand poking out, which was awesome. And like you don't see that a lot, if ever, in the series before that. It wasn't too overbearing like Metroid Fusion or Metroid Dread, but it didn't tell you a story at the expense of exploration like with Corruption, or maybe you could even say Metroid 2. I really think that this is like the perfect way to tell a good Metroid story that Metroid fans will like, which is like you can go and peel back the onion as much as you want. If you just want to get right to the action, right to fighting Metroid Prime, okay, great, you can do that. But if you want to learn about the space pirates and the history of Talon 4, you can do that as well. And there's so much just like extra stuff that just like really is there for people that want to explore and scan, like that you don't have to do at all. So I was gonna give it a 4, but I'm gonna give it a 5.
I took a film class last year, and we talked about the concept of a plot versus a story. And my professor, he said that a plot is the ordered sequence of events that a character goes on in their journey, but the story is what the film, or I guess in our case, the game, is actually about. And that's kind of how I look at Prime. I don't look at it from the perspective of a plot. I looked at it from the perspective of a story as one cohesive journey, and the journey of that narrative, to me, is a 5.
Yeah, I think I agree. And I think that like once you kind of realize that like, okay, we're not talking about a story that is like the same as a movie, for example, where you are told the events and you're told the plots. Like you have to go and find the plots for yourself. Once you kind of like wrap your head around that, where like it's a different kind of narrative, I think that it's incredibly strong. So, all right, so we're still perfect so far, but I'm gonna give up my first four on this next category, Doom, and that is pacing and progression. So, are there any parts that really bog the player down? Is the game funneling you from point A to point B, not too overtly, but also, not making sure that you're lost? And I think I'm going to give this game a 4 instead of a 5. And, a hallmark of the Metroid series is getting lost, is exploring, is going and being in areas that you feel like you shouldn't. But I do think that this game does have more than a few moments where, for example, like you'll be in Talon, you need to go all the way to Phendrana. Once you get to Phendrana, you need to go all the way back to Talon, and you're just kind of going back and forth a little bit, more than I might like. And maybe if there was a few more extra shortcuts, that might help out. Now, this is obviously extremely nitpicky, of course, right? But there is a lot of that, and I will say I really enjoy the artifact hunt, but there is a certain point, particularly when you get to Phendrana, and you need to go to like Phendrana's Edge, and then you need to go to the research base, where it's just like there is a lot of ground to cover, and like you're going through the same kind of tunnels and rooms as you have before. So I think that docks it down for me. Otherwise, I do think that the game does a very good job of just like telling you, okay, this is kind of where we need to go. It subtly funnels you to the point that you need to go, and not so subtly if you choose to have this and you are stuck. It does give you a point of interest that you can go and explore, which more often than not leads you to your next expansion or whatever that you need. So I wouldn't give this a perfect mark. Pretty close, because I do think that there are a few areas that the backtracking is a little bit excessive. But I do feel like that's for the most part okay.
Wow. Once again, I'm going to echo your sentiments. You literally used all the examples that I was going to use for my 4 as well.
I was copying your notes. Sorry, buddy.
No, it's all good. So it's actually funny. On the first, you probably don't remember this, but I do. On the very first episode of the podcast I was on, we were talking about the our control setups for a theoretical Metroid Prime trilogy release.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned at the end of the episode we were talking about other stuff that we'd want to see maybe change in the Prime trilogy. One of the things that I mentioned was the addition of a new elevator going from Talon to Phendrana, and you didn't like that idea. You said no, don't change it, don't do that idea. And then when you were replaying the game, that was the first thing that stuck out to you. And you're like, yeah. I was like, redemption.
I mean, either that or we could just like enable fast traveling. Like, or you know what I mean? Like, if we were to ever do a remake or a port, which does seem like it is coming, we could do fast traveling. I don't know. I feel like
maybe at the very end of the game during the artifact hunt, I think like a fast travel option could be opened up. But before that, I would not be in favor of that at all. But I would be in favor of a connection elevator from somewhere in Talon. Maybe the way that I would do it, because for people that might not have played this game in a while, basically the sequence that we're talking about is after you go into Phendrana for the first time and you get the boost ball, you have to go all the way back again through Magmore Caverns to Talon 4 to get the space jump,
mm-hmm.
and then you have to go through Magmore Caverns to Phendrana all the way again to get the wave beam. And after you do that, you're in Phendrana for a bit before you move on. But that one sequence does stand out, and personally what I would do for that sequence is I actually don't mind having to go back through Magmore to Talon on the first one, but having to do that all over again just to get back to Phendrana right after collecting just one item, that's a bit annoying.
It's a little bit of a momentum killer.
What I think would be good is after you collect the space jump boots, maybe be able to use those space jump boots to access a door that you couldn't access previously to take an elevator that goes to Phendrana, and that can open up a new passage that you can use on the adventure from there on out. That's how I would do it. And then as for the artifacts, much like you, I love the artifact hunt. But that being said, there's a few artifacts that I really wish you could collect sooner, because they're just tantalizing and teasing you at the very beginning. Like there's one in particular that I'm thinking of in the Space Pirate Research Facility. When you go on it's the place where you fight the flying pirates for the first
Yeah,
time.
and you can
And
see
there's
the ice that you need to melt, but you can't melt it yet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that one's really annoying. I wish
Yeah.
that the ice could just be removed and you could just get that on your first trip. But yeah, otherwise, yeah, there's not much changes that I would make, and I'm pretty much in agreement with you.
I think maybe what they could do is, and I don't know if this would help necessarily with what we're talking about, but like, if you could, let's say that you could go to the artifact temple and you could warp to, like, from the artifact temple, you could warp to the room that you've collected the artifacts in. So you could for example, like, you could warp to that research station after you've got that artifact in Phaedrona, or you could, like, go back into the one room in Magmore. I don't know if that would, like, help necessarily, because you would still need to get the artifacts first, but just throwing ideas out there. But something, yeah, some kind of elevator from Phaedrona to Talon would be good. And yeah, if you could collect artifacts a little bit earlier, or like at least while you're on the way. I mean, I guess it, like, on one hand too, like, I don't mind, because I do love exploring the planet and I do love the atmosphere of this planet. So like, it's not really that big of a deal, which is why I'm not giving this like a 1 or a 2 or anything like that. Like, it's still fun to traverse the world, but it would be nice if you could just be like, okay, artifact time. I'm gonna quickly, like, bang, 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 get these artifacts, and collect them and go for fight Ridley. So
Well, the cool thing about backtracking is what makes it so fun is you're exploring new things along the way. The problem that I have with that Phaedrona sequence that we talked about is you don't really discover very much in the terms of new things. You don't discover anything new in Magmore Caverns. It's just to get that space jump item, and then you have to go all the way back. And there isn't any progress made in Magmore specifically. It just
right.
feels like this unnecessary middleman.
Right. Okay. So we got our first 4s. Let's see if we can get back on track with the perfect score. I think that we can. So our next category is gameplay / quote unquote gimmick. And Metroid Prime really doesn't have a gimmick beyond the fact that it's just the first 3D Metroid. So of course we got the Dark World in Metroid Prime 2. We've got the ship gimmick in Metroid Prime 3. We've got the Emmys and Dread, etc., etc., etc. Metroid Prime is just a really good standard Metroid game. It doesn't really have what I would say a gimmick to it, but it does have rock solid gameplay, and I'm gonna give it a 5. And
Yeah,
I think that there could be a case if someone were to say, like, I'm gonna give the gameplay a 4 because of the tank controls. I can accept that, but I do think that it is important to put yourself in 2002 and realize that, like, dual analog controls weren't really they weren't really like the industry standard yet. And I would argue that, like, the Metroid Prime trilogy version of Metroid Prime, essentially, you have dual analog controls with the Wiimote anyways. So, but I mean, when you take away the tank controls and you just look at, like, okay, like, we put Metroid in 3D, it's a first person shooter. We've got all of these, like, I guess one of the gimmicks could be, like, the different visors and stuff like that. I mean, that could be considered a gimmick, but, like, we've got this great gameplay idea for extracting the story and information from the world with the scanning visor. We've got, like, a lot of platforming going on. We've got a seamless transition into the morph ball. Like, I think that there's a lot of really good, solid, simple gameplay mechanics that they were, like, that would have been very challenging for a lot of people to get from 2D to 3D, but they really just did it in such a seamless way that I can't give it anything other than a 5.
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement there for all the reasons you listed. Although I will say, when it comes to the tank controls, I actually think these are some of the best tank controls ever implemented. Obviously, I would much rather prefer dual analog, obviously, and when I go back to play this game, I pretty much exclusively play the trilogy version unless I'm really curious.
Yeah.
But I mean, that being said, like, even so, like, the lock-on feature is, like, such a huge help to alleviate those tank control problems. And now,
Yes.
obviously, I'm biased because I've been playing this game for nearly 20 years now, so I have a bit of life experience to go off of. But I think for most people, it shouldn't be too much of a hurdle to jump into. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve there, but, like, once you realize that you could just, like, quickly use aim up to the enemy and then hit L to lock on, and then you can start dashing out of the way, like, the game is able to find this really fun rhythm to its combat
Hmm.
that I really enjoy. And that's just the combat. We haven't even talked about all of these sick puzzles in this game and all the cool things that this game does to translate the 2D items over into 3D. I mean, like the spider ball is just absolutely miserable to use in both Metroid 2 and Samus Returns, in my opinion. But my God, it's one of the best items in the Prime trilogy, and it all started here.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also add that I recently played Metroid Prime, not the trilogy version, but like the OG version. So I did use tank controls for the first time in a long time, and they're fine. Like they really are. They're fine. It takes you a second to adjust, of course, but like it doesn't take that long, and especially considering that like for anything that's like that important, you're probably going to be locking on anyways. Like it really is fine. Like it doesn't impede anything. It doesn't hurt anything. So yeah, I mean the gameplay is just like so silky smooth in this game. And that really it's almost unbelievable that they were able to pull this off 20 years ago with a 2D series into first person. So yeah, I mean it's a pretty easy 5. I would entertain arguments for maybe a 4, but I'm not going to go there myself. It's a 5.
Yeah, I wouldn't fault anyone for giving it a 4, but like
Yeah.
me personally, yeah, easy 5.
Okay, next category. We got items and abilities. Doom, I've taken the lead the last couple here. I'll let you go first so I can stop stealing what you're gonna say.
All right, so yeah, this is much like the last category. This is one where, I could totally see and understand why someone would give it a 4. But again, I'm going to give this another 5 just because while the game doesn't introduce many new abilities, a lot of these old abilities are used in different ways. And, the beams at this point may as well be new abilities, like even though they are the classic old school beams. Like aside from
Mm-hmm.
the ice beam, like the wave beam, completely different than the way it's handled in 2D. Plasma beam, completely different, but they're still awesome beams in their own right. And again, I just talked about the spider ball. My God, the spider ball is like in my top 10 Metroid items of all time, solely because of what Prime did with it. It's so cool. The Faison suit, which Faison suit, my favorite suit of all time. It looks so incredibly cool. Even light suit, close second, but nothing will ever top that Faison suit for me, I don't think. And yeah, obviously some stuff had to be hindered back, like the space jump, which is just a double jump in this game.
Mm-hmm.
A little unfortunate. I do hope that Prime 4 is able to do a little bit more with that, but I also understand why they limited it to just a double jump in this game. And then also stuff like, oh my gosh, the visor system, the scan visor. I mean, I think the scan visor is one of the most brilliant tools ever created in a Metroid game, being simultaneously a unique gameplay device and a narrative device all at the same time. Like, it's so cool. And then you also have the thermal and X-ray visors, which change up the gameplay and again, just give you a whole new perspective on this world that just keeps growing. And that's another thing. This ties back into the atmosphere that the more items you collect, the more alive the world becomes. And there's like this really cool synergy between the two.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm gonna give it a 4 instead of a 5, and I was going back and forth on this, and I think that I'm gonna give it a 4 instead of a 5 because as you correctly point out, like a lot of these items are essentially new items, even though they're old items that are being reintroduced in Metroid Prime. But I will say that I do think that a lot of the items that you get are fairly simple. Like they're fairly simple items, and they're like a lot of my favorite items from Metroid were not able to be transitioned over into the 3D world. So like the speed boost, the screw attack, the space jump, and I understand why they weren't able to, of course. But that I do remember just being like, oh, that's too bad. Like it would have been really cool for this. But I think that one of the reasons why I might not go full 5 is because I do kind of feel like some of the items that even you do get in Metroid Prime are like not like they just haven't realized their full potential yet. So like the boost ball and the spider ball is a great example of that actually, where I feel like in Metroid Prime 2 they clicked and they got it, and it's just like, what if we combine these two? And then you were doing all sorts of crazy stuff. You're shooting across or whatever. Whereas in the boost ball in this game, I feel like it's very fun, but it's really just used for half pipes and like, okay, that's fine. The spider ball is incredibly fun in Metroid Prime still. Like there are a bunch of cool puzzles that you can do, but it didn't realize its full potential. I would say that about most of the beams in this, or I'm sorry, the visors in this game as well, where I think the scan visor is brilliant, which is almost worth a 5 for that right there. But I do think that the thermal visor and the X-ray visor were like their potential wasn't realized, particularly the X-ray visor. I think like I don't, you get it late in the game, you don't use it a whole lot. It's just a few floating platforms that you find with it, so it's not fully realized. And the thermal visor I think was a cool idea, but I don't know again if they knew that they wanted to do it. They just didn't know what the best application was for it. So you end up just kind of hitting a lot of switches. And the visor looks incredible, but I don't know if they ever like fully like realize the potential for that, which is fair because like I would say the exact same thing about the Echo visor and the Command visor in subsequent games as well. And then beyond that, you just have like your standard missiles. You get a couple of other beams, some suits. So it was stuff that we have seen before, not in the way that we'd seen it in Metroid Prime. But like really, really strong items. It was missing just a little something to give it a 5, I would say. So, but hey, 4 is still pretty good, and I agree that the Faison suit is like so awesome. It looks awesome, and is a critical part of the story too. So, there you go.
I mean, literally, it's why we got 2 more sequels.
Yeah. So yeah, 4 and a 5. All right. Well, that's Metroid Prime is still doing pretty good here. We've only got like we're missing a possible 2 points out of however many points that we have put together thus far here. Let's move on to our next category, and that is the areas. And there's no mistake about this one. That's a 5. That's a 5. I mean, we've done a couple mapping Metroids on areas from the Prime series. Phendrana from Frigate Orpheon, just incredible areas all around. Like we were kind of talking about with the world earlier, like the first time that you step off in Talon is a majestic experience. Phendrana is absolutely incredible. Chozo Ruins is an incredible area that's full of life. It's full of like rich history of the Chozo. It very much feels like an area where Chozo lived, and there was an ecosystem there. Magmore Caverns, incredible. This one is a rare instance where like they reuse a track that's very iconic before, but it doesn't feel overbearing. So very very like in depth. Every area in this game is very in depth, feels distinct from each other, has a presence to it, feels like it is a legit functioning part of the planet. So yeah, I mean, easy 5. Even the areas like, even the weakest area in the game, which I think I would say maybe is the Faison Mines, is still like absolutely incredible because it's serving a purpose. It's supposed to look a little bit dreary. It's supposed to look a little bit industrial. And again, it's just like this massive, each area like has its own sub areas to it that make it feel like just such a lived in ecosystem. So yeah, easy 5.
Yeah, a lot of people, I've seen some people criticize Metroid Prime because it reuses a lot of game themes, and I just inherently disagree with that significantly. Like, aside from Magmore Caverns, I really can't think of much else that like copies anything from the previous games. Like maybe Talon Overworld, but even then,
it cuts out pretty quick.
Like Brinstar Green is like this very underground jungle, whereas Talon Overworld is like it's certainly not a forest, certainly not a jungle. It's this lush open greenery.
Even they're using the Brinstar remix from the NES version, not even Super Metroid 2. So like it's like A, there's a lot of time removed. B, you only hear it until I think you get the boost ball. And C, it's like so totally different of a remix that it's might as well just be a new unrelated track.
Yeah, the atmosphere is like entirely different to like what Brinstar Green is. And even Brinstar NES, I would say, even though there is like you mentioned, there's a lot of elements borrowed from that. But like, Chozo Ruins, that's a completely new area type that we hadn't visited at this point. Phendrana Drifts, I guess you could technically say Metroid Fusion had an ice area, but even again, that was more of like a freezer on a space station, whereas this is like an actual snowed out location composed of not just native landmarks, but also, you also have the Space Pirate Research Facility, which has its own unique atmosphere to it as well. Faison Mines is completely unique. The Impact Crater, the Artifact Temple, which is technically a part of Talon Overworld, but I feel like that's fair to like almost call it its own unique area in and of itself because of what it offers. But yeah, like there's so much diverse locations in this game, and every single one of them knock it out of the park. And of course the Frigate Orpheon, I forgot about that too.
Yeah.
Like this game just offers so much.
Yep. I think that's a bad faith critique. I've never heard anybody critique that, but like I don't think that that's true. Like, is the areas in this game are, of all the categories I'm looking at, this might be like the biggest strength of Metroid Prime, and just like its incredible areas, which are like you can break down those areas into sub area. Like Talon has the Artifact Temple, it has a down frigate, it has like the lush part of Talon Overworld. Phendrana has the Edge, has a research facility. Faison Mines has like the mine proper, and then the deep impact site where like you have like the Hunter Metroids and stuff. Like it's just like every area is so fleshed out and lived in and like expansive that yeah, I could say, I could maybe have time for some critiques about Metroid Prime, but I don't know if I could have any critiques about the areas of Metroid Prime. I don't know if I'd have time for that. So yeah, this is an easy 5, and I kind of don't want to elaborate on this too much because we're gonna go in depth next week. But the next area is enemies / bosses, and I think that is also another easy 5 actually. Particularly the enemies portion of that, where like, yes, there are some enemies that existed in 2D Metroid that are recreated in 3D, but like when you're talking about going from 2D to 3D, every enemy is basically a new enemy and functions in a different way and functions in a just a complete new way. And there's so much diversity in the life forms on this planet. Like you have like just the incredible, like the small little bugs that you can roll past and they splash on your visor, which is another great gameplay element, by the way, that we didn't talk about. But like that, and just the depth of creatures, like even like the poisonous plants that just you can walk over and they kind of injure you. Like there's so much biodiversity on this planet, and everything looks awesome. The art style looks awesome, as we talked about earlier. That even without talking about the bosses, which we're going to talk about in depth next week, and they're awesome. Even if you took that out, just like the enemies on this planet alone, I feel like is an easy 5.
So I think this might be our first one where I'm going to disagree. I'm going to give this one a 4 actually.
Okay.
And it's actually because of those bosses in particular. Because when it comes to the general enemies, like I 100% agree. The enemy variety, and the way they interact, their attack patterns, the way that they're portrayed in the environment, and how it contributes to it being lived in, so awesome. Like I love all the enemy variety. I love all the stuff that you can learn about them.
Mm-hmm.
I love their unique behaviors. Like they genuinely, like, they don't feel like they're being controlled by AI for the most part. Maybe some of the space pirates feel like they're AI controlled, but like so much of the other creatures like genuinely feel like lived in, which I think is so awesome. The boss battles are good, but I definitely do think that there's some that haven't quite aged as well, in my opinion. And this is one of those areas where I think Prime 2 and even Prime 3 significantly step up.
Oh,
like not even just by a little bit, but like massively step up what you can do with boss fights in those games. But there's still I do think the boss fights are still good in this game. Just I do think that there's room for improvement, and that's where I'm going to give it a 4. But we'll talk more about that next week.
We will, and I'm surprised to hear you say. I think the boss fights in this game are like maybe not as good as Metroid Prime 3, but better than Metroid Prime 2. I'll say that. And
Metroid Prime 2, like Until Dread was like one of my favorite collection of boss fights, but
Well,
we'll
yeah,
get there when we
I'll
get
agree
there.
with you there. It's no Metroid Dread. Metroid Dread, the boss fights in that game are bonkers. But yes, we are going to be ranking all of the bosses in Metroid Prime next week, actually, which is going to be awesome. I can't wait for that. Actually, I can't wait to do the Metroid Fusion bosses too, because I think that that's a big strength of that game too, which is going to be kind of nice because I feel like sometimes I sound to myself like I dump on Metroid Fusion a lot on this show, which I love Metroid Fusion, so I'm excited to talk about an aspect of that game that I think is really strong. So
I don't think you dump on Fusion. It's like me and Samus Returns, where I have a lot more criticisms than the average user does. But at the end of the day, I still think it's a great game and that I genuinely enjoy playing.
yeah,
So
okay, let's go on to our next category. We only have two categories left, so we gotta bring it home here. The next category is expansions and power ups. So are the expansions that are hidden throughout the world fun to get? Are they creative? Are there lots of puzzles that you could do to acquire these items? I'm curious to hear your score.
I think I want to give this a 5, but at the same time, we did talk about some of those pacing issues from the artifact hunt in particular, which obviously very much ties into the puzzles and stuff that we're going to talk about. At the end of the day, though, I think I am still going to give this a 5, just because
Okay.
I think as a whole, I think these puzzles are really fun to solve. When we talk about the artifact hunts in and of themselves, it's not the puzzles themselves that aren't fun to solve. It's just some of the more tedious elements of the backtracking themselves. But just looking at the raw puzzles in and of themselves, I think for the most part, a lot of them hold up pretty well. And so, yeah, I'm from a pure puzzle standpoint, from a pure art expansion collecting standpoint, because like I don't really remember any of the tedious puzzles. I just remember like the fun of like doing that crazy spider ball puzzle to get the plasma beam. That's like the stuff that I remember Prime.
Okay. This is my lowest score that I'm giving Metroid Prime. Actually, I give it a 3, and I'll tell you why. So you guys know me. I love to explore and I love to get 100% in all my Metroid games. I'm not finished with it until I have the hundo. Okay, so in a lot of my favorite Metroid games, we're talking like some really crazy Shine Spark puzzles that you need to do in order to get the hundo. Or in Super Metroid, you just like, for example, you need to do like a lot of like really meticulous exploring and really know where a lot of your expansions are going to be and like how to acquire them, and you can get them efficiently too. I don't know, and to be fair, I think I would levy this criticism at the Metroid Prime trilogy as a whole, but I don't think that Metroid Prime has a lot of like expansions that are hidden out of the way where I'm just like, this is really fun, or like this is a doozy. Like it took a lot of thinking in order to get this. I can think of a few. Like there's the I believe it's in, oh, you know what? This is a Metroid Prime 2. Never mind. So I was gonna give an example, but that's not even the right game. So there is one where you get I think it's a sunburst at the top and you have to shoot the four corners of the room and it keeps on falling. That's pretty fun. We do, of course, we have our famous, like, we got to power bomb the glass tube, which is just a proud Metroid tradition.
Certified Hood classic.
Yeah, like, which is great. I love that. But like beyond that, like there's a room in Findrana in like the far edges too, where you have to shoot down a like a little iceberg that's on the top of the ceiling and make it crush the ice, and you can get an expansion that way. I just like, for every instance that I just mentioned, there's like 20 missiles that are just kind of like, oh, okay, I need to roll under here and get it, or like I need to shoot this, or I have to wait until I have the power up that's gonna blow up Bendesium in order to get behind this wall to get this power up. So I do think that it's missing a couple. I don't know. I think it's just missing that like fun and challenging puzzle aspect that I really gravitate towards when it comes to completing a game 100%. I think that Metroid Prime 2 has a little bit of an edge in this category because it does have like those crazy boost ball, like spider ball puzzles, and even Metroid Prime 3 like does have some cool ones where you can use your command visor to get your ship in order to do whatever. Like probably the coolest expansion in this game is probably in Chozo Ruins, where you have the the hall where there's like the slot for your ice beam, plasma beam, and wave beam, where you can then trigger the Chozo statue to open up different paths depending on which area you've opened. I just don't think that there's a lot of like expansions in Metroid Prime that are. It's not that they're not fun, but it's just like they're very standard, they're very simple in order to get, and it's not just like, like in Metroid Dread, for example, like after you do some of these crazy Shine Spark puzzles, you're just like, whew, I feel awesome. I feel like so smart for being able to pull that off. With Metroid Prime, it's just kind of like, okay, I came back here, I was in the area, I picked up a bunch of stuff that I couldn't before. Now it's easy since I have the right power-ups to actually get it. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think those are all fair criticisms for sure. There are definitely a lot of instances where it's not so much of a puzzle. It's just like, oh yeah, I don't have the correct item yet.
Right.
I just need to come back here when I do so that I can unlock this theoretical door or activate the switch, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But I guess, and I also agree that Prime 2 and 3, do a much better job at, actually like incorporating those into, it's more than just a switch. It's like you actually have to do this to do a task that can unlock the item, whether it's just flicking a switch to activate the entrance or something like that. But that being said, I still think I would still give it a 5 for me personally, but I also understand what you're saying. Another puzzle that stands out to me that I really like, that uses multiple abilities, is the spider ball puzzle in Faison Mines, where that gets you the grapple beam, because it's one that you have to do multiple times throughout your trek. You have to do it the first time to get the power bombs on your first trip to Faison.
We're talking like the ones with the blue rails, red rails, yellow rails. Yeah. Okay.
I love that puzzle a lot. So yeah, and because again, it's one that you have to do multiple times, and that's not really something you see in Metroid a lot. As a puzzle that has to be done more than once.
Yeah.
To get to different things. So I thought that was like really creative.
Yeah, and to be fair, like these expansions, like it certainly doesn't lower the quality of the game or anything like that. It's just it does, and I think that it doesn't have this because it was like the first, and I think that there's a lot of leeway that you can give this game for not having those kind of expansions. But yeah, like obviously they didn't have the ability to have the speed boost in this game, which is for me like a big. I'm a big speed boost guy. Like I love the speed boost, as I think we all do.
Yeah. It's my favorite. It's my favorite item, and I assume it's yours as well.
Yeah, and so like, and we don't have the space jump, and we don't have the screw attack, and like we don't have those kind of, or wall jumping, for example. Like we don't, and because it's the first game in 3D to ever do this, like I think that it's just kind of, I think it was a choice that it's like, all right, we're gonna keep it simple, we're gonna keep it classic, and I think that was the right choice actually too. So I don't want to. I mean, I guess this is a critique, but it's not. Like, I don't understand. I think it was the right choice for them to do it. It's just like, as a consequence of that, you just don't have it's not as I guess fun, or maybe memorable is a better word, or rewarding maybe is a good word I'm looking for, to go and sweep the board and get all your collectibles and stuff like that. But I mean, if that's the worst of Metroid Prime's problems, I think we're okay.
I definitely think that's fair, because like you look at Super Metroid Infusion in particular, when you're doing that 100% item sweep, a lot of those puzzles, there's a lot of technicality where like you get something wrong, start over that puzzle again, or exit the room, reset the speed booster blocks, start over and do that again. Whereas Prime, you don't really get a lot of that just because of the nature of the game. But it's not an issue for me, though. I can totally see why that would be a criticism for you, though.
Yeah, like I just, like in Metroid Fusion, for example, like I feel like you get to the end of that game and it's just like, I can't wait to go to Sector 6 and like go flying through the air with my Shine Spark in order to get this power bomb, or like I have to space jump and make sure that I don't touch anything or else the floor is going to cave in and all the pitfall blocks are going to make me have to start over, or like I want to Shine Spark through space to get this, power bomb that's in the restricted zone. It's like there's a lot of really cool ones that I can think of off the top of my head in those games, or like even in Super Metroid, where it's like, okay, I know, I feel so smart because I know that there's a missile expansion right here, and I know that as soon as I get it, if I drop a power bomb, boom, this statue is going to dissolve, and there's another expansion right there. So, like, I feel like Metroid Prime is missing that, but again, like, I feel like that's okay because, what I think their goal was to make sure that this game was as solid and as like an easy transition into 3D as it possibly could be. And like even in subsequent Metroid games, like, we did bring back things like the screw attack or wall jumping, and like it never was really good. So like I think that that's probably just okay to have like your simple like just steady Eddie like method of collecting missiles and expansions. So
I think the wall jump is kind of cool. Obviously, nowhere near as cool as how the screw attack is handled in the 2D games or even other M. But like,
yeah,
I think I was fine with at least the wall jumping compromise, especially with what they did with it in Prime 3. But I would agree, base screw attack is significantly underwhelming.
yeah. Which hey, maybe they'll revisit that for Prime 4. Okay, we got one category left, and it's music. You want to go or should I?
Well, I feel like I should probably start this off.
All right, hit it.
Well, as a lot of you know, last week was Metroid Prime's 20th anniversary, November 18th, 2002, and to celebrate that, on the 20th anniversary, which was on Friday, at the time of this recording, I released a passion project that I had in mind for about 4 years now. It started with a research paper that I wrote for a class in 2018, and I released a video that used that as a foundation, but heavily extracted upon in where I argue that Metroid Prime is a soundtrack ahead of its time. And I'm not going to spoil how it is. If you want to watch that, you can check out omegametroid.com and check out the video for yourself.
Hey,
It's a 30+ minute video. Andy Spiteri over here makes a cameo in one of the quoted sections.
that's right.
And
I messed up my quote though. Ugh.
Hey, we fixed it though. We fixed it in post. That's all that matters.
We fixed it. I didn't fix anything, but yes, it's this might be the easiest 5 of the whole bunch actually.
I almost feel like a 5 is too low of a score to give this.
You could almost
soundtrack.
throw out a 6. I mean, like, what? Let me ask you a question. What do you think is the worst track in this game? Would it be like it has to be Faison Mines, right?
The quote unquote worst track, which I'm heavily emphasizing in quotes. The worst track that I would give this game is probably the ambient music that specifically plays in the ammo recharge stations, which is a variant of the elevator theme. That's probably my least favorite track of the game.
Okay.
But like it's still a fine track. And like everything about this game, whether it's an intentionally melodic track or whether it is an ambient track, it to me is just so incredibly memorable and it fits the game. Which again, I described that in detail about how Kenji Yamamoto was able to do that. And in the 30+ minute video, which again, you should check it out. Going to double plug that.
On megametroid.com.
Megametroid.com. New episodes every week. The #1 Metroid podcast on the web. Anyways.
Right.
But this game is absolutely incredible. Because it to me, like when I look at my ideal of Metroid music, I feel like everyone has their own ideals of like what a peak Metroid soundtrack. And to me, Prime 1 and 2 is like this is like the level that I measure all of the other games to. This to me, Prime 1 and 2 is my definition of perfect Metroid music.
Yeah.
And it's all heavily influenced from Hirokazu Tanaka's original philosophies on the first game. And to me, in my opinion, this is the fully realized version of what he was trying to do on the NES and the Famicom Disk System. And we've talked about various tracks on Mapping Metroid. We talked about the Talon Overworld themes and and not the wrecked ship, but the down frigate theme.
Mm-hmm.
Getting
your wrecked ships mixed up.
But yeah, you have that. We've talked about the Faison Mines. I think both of the Faison Mines themes are incredible.
That was my point actually. Is like if you were to ask me what the quote unquote worst track in Metroid Prime would be, I might say it's Faison Mines, but that track is still awesome. Like, it's still tense. It's still atmospheric. It's still, like, while you're playing, it fits the tone perfectly. And like, just, like, the way that they use old music, I think is very impressive. Like, that Brinstar remix, Magmore, the Meta Ridley theme is awesome. But, like, I mean, we're talking about a game that has, like, Findrana's Drift, like the Findrana Drift track it was an instant classic, a second that it was heard, which is actually too bad because like it overshadows the also amazing Findrana's Edge, which I would love to hear at any club anywhere in the world. I mean, Talon Overworld, the original track that plays in that game, even Chozo Ruins, which is like kind of a more subtle track maybe, still has like just that classic twang and the synth that we all come to associate with this game. Like we talked about on Mapping Metroid, we talked about the Down Frigate theme, incredible. Like you just go down the list and like the title theme is like so pitch perfect. Like if like that theme was so important, I feel like, to set the tone for the whole game, and it nailed it. And it did it in a different way than Super Metroid did, where I think it would have been easy and understandable to have like a remix of that Super Metroid title theme, and I think that would have been fine. But like they were like, no, let's make a piece of music that has like the same qualities but is completely original. Like it's so impressive.
You actually mentioned Chozo Ruins, and I actually think Chozo Ruins is like one of the coolest, like technically impressive tracks in this game. Because we talked about this back in Atmosphere, but it really it feeds back in the music and the atmosphere feed back into each other as storytelling devices, and I think that Chozo Ruins is like one of the most fascinating examples of this. Because there's actually 4 different variations of the Chozo Ruins themes. You have the entrance, the main plaza, the depths. And then after you get the morph ball, you get the main theme that plays throughout most of the area up until you get to the furnace area and you really start encountering the Chozo ghosts.
I want to talk about that theme. Actually, I was going to mention there's 2 themes that I want to shout out that nobody ever talks about, and one of them is the Chozo Ghost theme, and it's awesome. Like
I love the Chozo Ghost theme.
It's just like so shit, hard. like it's like it's time to fight. Let's go. And the second one, the same thing, is the Metroid Prime battle theme. God, that theme is so awesome. Like it just is like sets you up with like the doof, doof, and it's like this big fight feel that it kind of builds up for a second, and then it really cranks
does feel
in.
Like a WWE match about to start.
It's so awesome. Like that. I love like the way that it starts off like the dude. It's so good. I'm gonna play that as the intro music for next week.
I love both of those boss fight themes so much. Like they're so good.
Yes. Yeah, that theme is so awesome. And nobody ever talks about the Metroid Prime boss theme, but it's so awesome.
The second phase, I think, is in like my top 5 favorite all-time Metroid tracks. I love it so much, and it reincorporates the main 6-note Metroid motif that appears in almost all the games. It's so subtle, but it's so cool.
Yeah, so good. So
like
good.
going back to Chozo Ruins for a bit, like what I love about it is like so many of the instruments just sound like all of the native wildlife that you encounter in the Chozo Ruins. You'll hear bird chirps, and it's so ambiguous as to whether or not that's the birds in the sky or whether that's supposed to represent the cries of the Chozo who no longer occupy the place. And then once you get the morph ball, you get like a shaker, a hi-hat, a kick drum, and a snare, and all of those instruments are rearranged so that they're in line with the meter, and all of a sudden all of these ambiguous sounds combine together to form melodies. It's so cool what is done with those Chozo Ruins tracks. I'm not going to go into too much more about that because the video goes way more in depth, but like it's one of my favorite things that this game does. I love it.
Easy 5. If we were gonna break the scale, I know I said this about the areas, but it's probably in the music that if we were ever gonna break the scale and throw it a 6, it would probably be this, right? Like this soundtrack is an all-timer. Absolutely, every track is awesome. And frankly, our scores for this game were as awesome as I predicted that they might be. So we've went through 10 categories of the essential categories that make up a Metroid game. So world and atmosphere, art style, story, pacing, progression, gameplay, items and abilities, the areas, enemies and bosses, expansions and power-ups, and music. And we've came away with some pretty high scores here that I will now read. So out of a possible 50 points, I have awarded Metroid Prime 46, and you have awarded Metroid Prime 47. Pretty good. Pretty good indeed.
Maybe instead of giving the music a 6, maybe we can just give one of our other categories that we didn't give a 5 an extra point. Maybe that's what we do instead.
We're not that. We don't need to do that because the scores that we've given this game those are great scores, and they can stand alone on these scores. Like we're talking like in the 90 out of 100% range here. as is fitting, because I think that this is one of the best games ever made. And often when I'm thinking of my favorite Metroid game, I go back and forth between Super and I go back and forth between Prime. And they're both just so incredibly amazing in different ways. They're so similar, but they're so different. And I think that that's just like so incredible that this series has two games that are like the pillars and building blocks of the franchise. Like, everyone knows I'm a big Zelda guy, but you can really look at Zelda and be like, Ocarina of Time is like the pillar of that series, and everything that came after was kind of built around it. And like, this series has two games like that, where like all these games are built around these two games that came prior, and just it's just an incredible achievement. Metroid Prime is one of my favorite games, and I love talking about Metroid Prime.
I'm not sure if I would agree about that on Zelda, because of Breath of the Wild. I feel like that's going to be a new pillar that sets a standard for Zelda moving forward.
Yeah, it could
obviously
be.
It's too early to tell, but like I have a feeling that it's going to be like a new standard in its own right. But
and if you want to listen to us discuss this, this very topic we covered on the Zelda cast last week, so you can check that out. But yeah, Metroid Prime, legendary, eternal, fantastic. What else can you say? And we're not done talking about Metroid Prime. Next week we are diving in deep with the bosses. We're gonna have a special guest, so that's very fun. I'm really looking forward to that, and I'm really looking forward to talking about like the bosses that we don't talk about a lot. Like, we've all talked about the Ridley fight, we've talked about the Metroid Prime fight. I'm really looking forward to talking about like Flagra or like the Mecha Hive or stuff like that. I'm looking forward to diving in, and we know already that you have some critiques about those fights, so that's gonna be.
But I still think they're a good collection of bosses, though.
All right. Well, it's going to be a good time. I can guarantee you that.
I'm not going to be hating.
All right. Well, as long as there's no ones or twos, that's okay. All right. Well, thank you guys for checking out the Omega Metroid podcast. We're hoping that you're enjoying this retrospective on Metroid Prime. The train keeps going, and then we're switching over to Metroid Fusion and giving that game its time in the sun. So the hits are going to keep on coming, and then we're going to finish off the year strong by predicting what we think might happen for this series in 2023. So that's going to be very fun. We want you guys to check us out over on Twitter, while you still can, at Spiteri316, at Doomittle Cross, and at Omega Metroid Pod. OmegaMetroid.com has all your Metroid needs, guides, news, maps, everything that you could possibly want. And guess what? Now it has merch. That's right. You can grab some Omega Metroid swag. You'll be the sharpest dressed guy in your block. That I guarantee. I've washed my shirt. I put it through the wash. Comes out fine. So I was, I quality test it. They look good. They don't fall apart. So that's cool. That's available over on OmegaMetroid.com. Just click the link at the top. It'll take you to our Etsy store, and you can get whatever color you want for these Omega Metroid shirts.
Mine is shipping right now, so I'm hoping I can wear it next week.
I went a little bit bold. I got a yellow Omega Metroid shirt. I don't own a single yellow shirt, but I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna get yellow. I don't need another black shirt. I'm getting a yellow shirt. I'm gonna wear that next week.
I was boring. I went with a black shirt. So.
I feel like I kind of want a black shirt too, though. Like, now that I said that, I might just order another. Anyways, you can get your own shirt over on OmegaMetroid.com. We are going to get out of here. Make sure that you are liking, subscribing, reviewing, recommending, all that good stuff wherever you get your podcasts. And we will see you next week to talk to bosses of Metroid Prime. Until then, take care.